The morning sunlight sliced through the blinds of my office, painting stripes across my desk that should have been comforting but only reminded me of the suffocating monotony of my life. It was just another day, one of countless, yet an inexplicable tension made it feel like the first day of a storm I couldn't yet see. I rubbed my temples and tried to focus on my computer screen, but the words blurred into nonsense. Something was off. Something was about to happen. And then she appeared, Naomi. She walked in like she belonged there, though I had never seen her before. Her smile was effortless, almost dangerous in its casual perfection. My chest tightened as my eyes followed her across the room, every subtle movement drawing me in without permission. I told myself it was ridiculous. I didn't even know her. She wasn't part of my life. But the pull was undeniable, as though some unseen current had suddenly dragged me into her orbit. I forced myself to look away, focusing on my keyboard, on the emails stacked in neat rows, pretending that work could anchor me. But it didn't. Naomi's presence lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. Every laugh she let slip, every tilt of her head, every casual glance toward me felt deliberate, like it was designed to unsettle me. My heart pounded, not with anger, not with fear, but with something far more confusing, something I couldn't name. And then there was Suzan. Suzan didn't enter the room the way Naomi did. She arrived quietly, her steps soft but precise, each movement measured as though she owned every inch of the space she crossed. When our eyes met, the effect was instantaneous. My chest tightened, my thoughts scattered, and for a moment the office ceased to exist. I felt exposed, like every secret part of me had been observed and cataloged by someone who already knew too much. I tried to focus again, tried to convince myself it was impossible to feel this way about strangers. But the truth was undeniable. They were already weaving themselves into the edges of my life. Without saying a word, without revealing a single intention, they had begun to manipulate the rhythm of my day. Each glance, each casual touch, every laugh or sigh seemed to be strategically placed, as though the universe itself had bent to their design. By lunchtime, my mind was a war zone. Naomi had found reasons to linger near my desk, offering help with tasks I didn't need help with. Her hands brushed mine, always brief, never overt, and each time my body betrayed me, responding with heat and tension I couldn't control. Suzan was subtler but more devastating. She would enter a conversation, tilt her head, smile faintly, and suddenly I was off balance, heart racing, mind spinning. I was terrified that I wanted it, terrified that I couldn't stop it. My mind wrestled with itself, trying to convince me I was imagining it, that these were innocent coincidences, that I was merely overreacting. But the more I tried to rationalize, the tighter the trap seemed to close around me. And all the while, I didn't see the bigger picture. Naomi and Suzan weren't here by chance. They weren't just beautiful strangers or random office acquaintances. They were instruments, carefully tuned to manipulate me. Every laugh, every touch, every whispered word was part of a plan I didn't even know existed. Joel and Chris, my so-called friends, had orchestrated this entire scenario. And I walked blindly into it, believing I was the one in control, when in reality, I had been caught before I even realized there was a net. The next hours passed in a blur. I found excuses to talk to Naomi, to linger in her presence, pretending to discuss work while secretly drowning in thoughts I didn't dare confess. Suzan appeared at precisely timed intervals, ensuring that my attention fractured, that my emotions twisted in conflicting directions I couldn't reconcile. By the end of the day, my brain was frayed, my judgment clouded, and a part of me, I hated to admit it, thrived on the confusion. I didn't know it then, but the first seeds of destruction had already been planted. The trap was set with surgical precision, and I was the unwitting prey, drawn ever deeper into the carefully constructed illusion. Even as I left the office, walking into the warm glow of the afternoon sun, I felt an uneasy thrill, a dangerous sense of anticipation. Something had shifted irrevocably. Naomi's smile haunted me. Suzan's gaze lingered in my mind. And somewhere deep inside, I knew, without fully understanding how or why, that my life had already begun to unravel. By nightfall, when I sat alone in my apartment, I replayed every encounter, every accidental touch, every fleeting look. And though a part of me tried to rationalize, tried to claim that I was imagining it, the truth was undeniable. Something was coming, and I had no idea I was already too late. Little did I know, the real game had only just begun. The pieces were moving, and I was already caught in a current I could not escape. The next morning, the office felt heavier. The air seemed charged, as though every corner, every desk, every flicker of fluorescent light was conspiring against me. Naomi was already there, perched at the edge of my workspace, pretending to review a document, though I knew perfectly well she hadn't glanced at it. Her fingers brushed mine just enough to spark an awareness I couldn't dismiss. I told myself it was accidental, that I was imagining it. But deep down, I felt the unmistakable tug of something deliberate. Suzan arrived shortly after, leaning against the doorway as if she had the right to occupy every inch of space. Her presence was quiet but invasive, a gentle pressure that pressed against my thoughts, distracting me from deadlines, from logic, from reason itself. Every word she spoke seemed layered with meaning I couldn't decode. My brain raced, trying to separate reality from imagination, trying to convince myself I was sane, though every instinct screamed otherwise. Throughout the morning, the subtle attacks continued. Naomi would accidentally spill coffee near my papers, requiring my hands to brush hers while cleaning up. Suzan would find reasons to walk past my desk, just close enough to let her perfume linger, making my chest tight. My mind was splitting into fragments, each one caught between desire, confusion, and an almost primal fear that I was losing control. Lunch brought no respite. I found myself sitting with both of them, a casual conversation about work turning into a delicate dance of glances, laughs, and veiled provocations. Naomi leaned in, her voice soft, brushing against my ear with a warmth I couldn't ignore. Suzan's gaze followed every word, a silent accusation and a promise all at once. I tried to focus on my salad, but each bite felt meaningless, my thoughts consumed entirely by them. By mid-afternoon, I was utterly unmoored. Emails and reports blurred together, deadlines became irrelevant. And all I could do was anticipate their next move. Naomi caught me staring once and smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my stomach drop. I told myself I had to pull away, to act normal, to regain control. Yet when I tried, both of them found subtle ways to draw me back, to entangle me further. It wasn't just their physical presence. It was the way they spoke, laughed, and positioned themselves. Everything was calculated to disrupt my equilibrium. Every glance was a puzzle, every smile a test. My mind became a labyrinth of possibilities and suspicions, none of which led anywhere safe. And through it all, a creeping realization grew in the back of my mind. I couldn't escape. I didn't know how to. The evening came and I walked home like a man caught in a fog. I replayed every interaction, analyzing every detail, trying to find some clue, some hint that could reassure me. But the more I thought, the less I understood. I was already entangled, already ensnared in a web I couldn't even see fully. And I still had no idea that every move, every brush of the hand, every smile had been choreographed. Naomi and Suzan weren't acting on chance or whim. They were executing a precise plan. Joel and Chris were the unseen hands behind it all, orchestrating every detail to lead me into ruin. And I walked into it willingly, blinded by desire and curiosity. By the time I reached my apartment, the line between reality and illusion had blurred completely. I felt exhilarated and terrified all at once, like I was dangling over a cliff, while someone held a rope just out of reach. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from returning to the office the next day, from falling deeper into their trap, from craving the chaos I didn't yet understand. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The web was tightening, and I had already stepped into a storm I could not escape. The third day in the office felt like walking into a dream I couldn't wake from. Every glance, every movement, every casual conversation seemed loaded with a subtle, unspoken tension. Naomi had perfected the art of appearing innocent while drawing my attention in ways I couldn't rationalize. She laughed at my jokes a little too long, leaned in a little too close, and left me trembling in the simplest moments. Suzan was even more insidious. She had this uncanny ability to be both present and absent at the same time. Her eyes would follow me across the room, always watching, always calculating. Yet when I tried to meet her gaze directly, she would look away with the faintest smile, a teasing acknowledgement that left me unsettled and craving more. By mid-morning, my thoughts were entirely consumed. I found myself making excuses just to be near them, offering help I didn't really need to give, pretending to need advice I didn't require. Each interaction felt like walking on a razor's edge, thrilling, terrifying, and utterly addictive. I could sense a pattern, a rhythm, but I couldn't place it. Was it all coincidence, or was I imagining it? My rational mind screamed no, yet the pull was undeniable. At lunch, they sat together, both of them, and somehow I ended up in the middle. The conversation was harmless, yet every word, every laugh, every tilt of a head seemed loaded with intent. Naomi brushed against my arm while reaching for her coffee. Suzan's hand lingered near mine when she passed by with her tray, and I felt my composure slipping further with every passing second. I told myself to step back, to regain control, to think clearly. But each attempt only made me more aware of how hopelessly entangled I had already become. My mind was a battlefield, desire warring with reason, curiosity warring with fear. And all the while, I remained unaware of the true forces at play behind the scenes. Joel and Chris, my so-called friends, were orchestrating everything. Every smile, every brush of a hand, every seemingly coincidental interaction had been planned in advance. They were setting the stage for something catastrophic, something I couldn't yet foresee. And I, blind and intoxicated by my own impulses, was walking directly into the trap. By the afternoon, my focus was shattered. Work became secondary, emails unread, calls unanswered. All I could do was anticipate their next moves, analyze every glance, every word, every subtle inflection. I was both observer and participant in a game I didn't understand, yet couldn't resist. As I left the office that evening, the tension followed me home. My apartment felt smaller, constricting, as though the walls themselves were closing in, reflecting the chaos that had taken over my mind. I replayed the day's interactions over and over, dissecting every detail, trying to find some logic, some explanation. But there was none. Only an overwhelming sense that my life was beginning to unravel in ways I couldn't yet grasp. Even in my solitude, I felt the lingering presence of Naomi and Suzan, their influence insidious and inescapable. I was trapped in a psychological web, unable to see the threads, yet aware enough to know I was already caught.
If this story hits you, you can support the channel with a quick hype.
Little did I know, the strands were tightening. Each calculated interaction, each subtle manipulation was bringing me closer to a point of no return. And by the time I would fully comprehend the situation, it would be far too late. The fourth morning arrived like a whisper of danger I couldn't ignore. The office felt smaller, the air heavier, and every glance from Naomi and Suzan seemed sharper, more deliberate. I could feel the subtle tension radiating off them like an electric current, and with each step I took, I fell further into a maze I couldn't navigate. Naomi had this effortless way of entering the room, adjusting her hair, tilting her head, smiling just enough to pull my attention away from anything else. Every time she leaned over my desk to look at a file, the brush of her hand sent shivers down my spine. I knew it shouldn't affect me, that it was all superficial, but my body betrayed me in ways my mind couldn't control. Suzan was different, more calculated. Her presence was a soft pressure at first, just standing nearby, pretending to organize papers, laughing softly at jokes I didn't even make. But over time, the pressure grew, subtle touches, fleeting eye contact, the kind of attention that made my thoughts scatter and my heart race. I was losing the ability to distinguish reality from illusion. Lunchtime became a battlefield of restraint. They sat together, smiling innocently, but every laugh, every shared glance between them felt like a challenge aimed squarely at me. I found myself questioning every impulse, every thought, every desire. Was I really drawn to them, or was I being manipulated? The line between conscious choice and instinct blurred with every passing minute. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted yet alert in a way that felt unnatural. Each interaction was magnified in my mind. Every accidental touch, every laugh, every coincidental glance consumed me. I noticed how Naomi always chose a seat close enough to brush against me, how Suzan's hand lingered near mine just long enough to unsettle me. I tried to remind myself that I was rational, that I could step back, that I could regain control, but each attempt only highlighted how trapped I already was. I didn't yet know the truth. Joel and Chris were pulling strings, orchestrating every subtle move. Naomi and Suzan were their instruments, executing each detail with precision. Every laugh, every brush of a hand, every fleeting touch was a carefully placed piece in a puzzle I wasn't even aware existed. And I, intoxicated by curiosity and desire, walked willingly into it. Even as the office emptied and I prepared to leave, I replayed the day over and over. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: desire, guilt, confusion, fear, and an almost addictive anticipation of what the next day would bring. I couldn't stop thinking about Naomi's smile, Suzan's gaze, the weight of their presence lingering long after they were gone. By the time I reached home, exhaustion had set in, but my mind refused rest. Every moment from the day replayed in loops, dissected, analyzed, overanalyzed. I was caught in a psychological vortex, unable to see the edges, yet aware of the pull that held me fast. And so the trap tightened. Every subtle manipulation, every deliberate glance, every carefully orchestrated interaction brought me closer to a reality I couldn't yet imagine. A reality that would eventually shatter everything I thought I knew about myself, my friends, and the people I trusted. Little did I know, this was the point where the lines between control and chaos would begin to vanish, and I had already crossed the threshold without realizing it. The office felt different that morning, heavier somehow, as if the air itself had conspired to trap me in a fog I couldn't escape. Naomi appeared first, gliding past my desk with that familiar, effortless grace. Her smile, that slow, teasing curve of lips, made my chest tighten. I knew it was irrational, that I had no business feeling this way about someone I barely knew, but my body refused logic. Suzan followed soon after, quiet, deliberate, every step precise. She leaned against a filing cabinet just close enough for me to notice the subtle sway of her posture, the gentle brush of her hair across her shoulder. It was maddening, both of them drawing me in, pulling me toward a cliff edge I couldn't see. Throughout the morning, they found ways to intersect with my work. Naomi needed my opinion on documents I hadn't written. Suzan needed help with a computer glitch that didn't exist. Each excuse brought them closer, every touch deliberate, every glance calculated. I felt like a marionette, pulled by strings I couldn't identify. Lunchtime became unbearable. They sat together, laughing, teasing, exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. I tried to act casual, to focus on my salad, on pretending that I wasn't unraveling. But each laugh that carried across the table, each brush of a hand, each subtle leaning closer, pulled me further into the trap. I could barely think, barely breathe, and every instinct screamed at me to stop, yet I was powerless. By mid-afternoon, my mind was a battlefield. Rationality waged war against desire, against curiosity, against the intoxicating pull of their presence. I found myself questioning every thought, every impulse, every desire. Was I imagining it all? Or was I really falling inch by inch into something I couldn't name? And I still didn't know. Joel and Chris were invisible architects of my destruction, orchestrating every subtle interaction with precision. Naomi and Suzan were executing the plan flawlessly, guiding me step by step into a labyrinth I couldn't see. Every laugh, every smile, Every accidental touch was part of a design I had no way of comprehending, and I walked into it willingly, intoxicated by every forbidden thrill. As the day dragged on, I could feel my composure slipping. My work faltered, emails were left unread, deadlines ignored. All that mattered were their smiles, their touches, the subtle sway of their bodies, the way they dominated my attention without trying. I knew I was losing control, but I couldn't stop myself. By evening, I staggered home, mentally exhausted yet unable to rest. Every interaction replayed in my mind, dissected, analyzed, twisted. I felt trapped in a web I couldn't escape, yet part of me craved the very chaos consuming me. The line between rationality and obsession blurred, leaving me teetering on the edge of a decision I wasn't even aware I was making. The trap was tightening, every move deliberate, every touch precise, and I was completely ensnared, walking blindly into a storm whose full force I couldn't yet imagine. The game had shifted. I was no longer an observer. I was the prey. Little did I know, the strands of deception were converging. Each day, each glance, each smile brought me closer to the point where my world would shatter, and I would have no idea who I could trust, or who was controlling the strings. The morning light hit the office, but today it felt oppressive, almost hostile. Each shadow seemed heavier, each movement sharper. Naomi was already there, seated close to my desk, pretending to review some documents, though I knew perfectly well she wasn't actually reading anything. Her hand brushed mine by accident more than once, and each touch sent a jolt through me I couldn't rationalize. Suzan appeared moments later, gliding silently past the rows of desks. Her presence was quiet but commanding, subtle but overwhelming. I caught her gaze across the office, and for a moment the world around me vanished. My thoughts scattered, my pulse raced. It was maddening. I knew I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't crave this chaos, yet every fiber of my being pulled me deeper into the maze they had constructed. Throughout the morning, I became painfully aware of every small interaction. Naomi would need advice on tasks I hadn't been assigned. Suzan would accidentally drop papers near me, forcing my hands to brush hers. Each moment was perfectly calculated, though I didn't yet understand the choreography. I was losing control, piece by piece, without even realizing it. Lunch was unbearable. They both sat at the same table, laughing together, exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. Naomi leaned in just slightly, her breath near my ear, whispering something mundane, yet it set my mind ablaze. Suzan's fingers lingered near mine as she reached for a drink, and my chest tightened. My thoughts were fragmented, my mind trapped in a swirl of desire, confusion, and fear. I couldn't think clearly, couldn't act rationally, yet I couldn't pull away. By mid-afternoon, my focus had disintegrated completely. Work was secondary. Everything else faded except for the subtle gravitational pull of their presence. I noticed patterns I couldn't decode. Naomi's careful timing, Suzan's subtle positioning, the way they seemed to know exactly how to push me to the edge without breaking the illusion. I was simultaneously fascinated and terrified. I told myself repeatedly that I could step back, regain control, remind myself this was irrational, that I was being manipulated. But the more I tried, the stronger the pull became. Each smile, each touch, each glance anchored me deeper in the trap. I felt like a man dangling over a precipice, unable to see the bottom, yet unable to resist leaning forward. And still, I didn't know the truth. Joel and Chris were invisible architects, executing a plan with precision that I couldn't yet perceive. Naomi and Suzan were instruments of their design, guiding me subtly, patiently, inexorably toward a breaking point. I was trapped in a carefully woven web of desire and deceit, completely unaware of how carefully I had been ensnared. By evening, I staggered home again, mentally shredded, my thoughts consumed by their presence. Every glance, every touch, every word replayed endlessly in my mind. I was caught in a loop, a spiral of obsession and confusion. I couldn't escape, couldn't rest, couldn't think clearly. Every day, every moment, every subtle interaction pulled me closer to a fate I couldn't yet imagine. The tension had reached its peak. I was no longer merely influenced by them. I was under their control. Every instinct screamed that I was being played, but I didn't know by whom or how. And yet, I craved the very chaos consuming me, even as it began to erode the foundations of my sanity. Little did I know, this was the stage where the trap would begin to tighten irreversibly. Each calculated glance, each orchestrated interaction, each subtle touch was bringing me closer to a collapse from which there would be no return. The office air felt electric, charged with a tension I could neither explain nor resist. Naomi arrived first, sliding into her usual spot near my desk, pretending to study documents. But I knew the truth. Her proximity wasn't innocent. Each subtle touch of her hand, each leaning movement, each calculated glance seemed designed to unbalance me completely. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and I couldn't stop noticing every detail about her. Every flicker of her eyes, the curve of her lips, the faint scent that lingered around her. Suzan followed shortly after, silent and deliberate, her presence like a gravitational pull I couldn't escape. She leaned against the doorway, her eyes tracking me with a precision that was unnerving yet thrilling. Every laugh she let slip, every casual turn of her head seemed to whisper, "You are ours to manipulate," and I believed it, though I didn't know it yet. By mid-morning, I had lost all sense of control. Naomi needed help again with trivial tasks, and I found myself leaning closer than necessary, my heart racing, my thoughts a tangle of desire and confusion. Suzan dropped papers near my desk intentionally, forcing my hands to brush hers. Every contact, every glance was deliberate, though I had no way of seeing the strings being pulled behind the scenes. Lunch became a psychological minefield. Sitting across from both of them, I couldn't eat. My focus shattered under the weight of their presence. Naomi's laughter carried across the table like a melody designed to hypnotize me. Suzan's eyes seemed to pierce my thoughts, reading desires I didn't even know I had. I felt like I was drowning, yet I kept reaching for the surface, only to be pulled further under. The afternoon worsened everything. Work tasks blurred into insignificance. Emails and reports became meaningless. Every glance, every casual brush of skin, every playful remark, each calculated move anchored me further into their trap. I knew I should step back, regain rational control, but I couldn't. I craved it. The danger, the chaos, the intoxicating thrill of being so completely ensnared. And still, I had no clue. Joel and Chris, my so-called friends, remained invisible architects of my doom. Naomi and Suzan were the precise instruments executing a plan I could not yet comprehend. Every smile, every touch, every seemingly casual interaction was carefully orchestrated to drive me closer to collapse. And I was walking willingly, blind to the design, intoxicated by the thrill and desire they had engineered. By evening, I staggered home mentally frayed, unable to stop replaying every detail. Each interaction was a spiral I couldn't escape, a loop of confusion, obsession, and desire. I felt trapped, yet part of me wanted to stay, wanted to be consumed entirely by the chaos. I didn't realize it then, but I had reached the edge. The trap was nearly complete. Every subtle manipulation, every glance, every calculated touch had brought me to the brink of a psychological collapse from which there would be no return. The web was tightening, the pieces were falling into place, and when the truth finally came, it would shatter everything I thought I knew. The office was quieter than usual, almost unnaturally so. Naomi and Suzan approached me, smiling as if nothing were amiss, yet there was a tension I hadn't noticed before, a subtle glint in their eyes I couldn't decipher. I was nervous, distracted, my mind still entangled in the web of desire and confusion that had dominated my life for weeks. Then it happened. A casual comment, a slip, something so small yet so explosive that it felt like a bomb detonating inside my head. Naomi mentioned a weekend plan, something she and Joel had discussed casually as if it were ordinary. Suzan laughed, referencing something Chris had said about me. My stomach dropped, my pulse quickened, and suddenly everything clicked. Naomi, Suzan, Joel, Chris. I froze. Every interaction, every glance, every smile, every touch, the pieces finally fell into place. The women I thought were strangers, the ones I had been falling for, the ones who had consumed my every thought, they weren't strangers at all. They were their girlfriends, Joel and Chris's girlfriends, my friends, the architects of this entire nightmare. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Every moment of desire, every brush of a hand, every laugh and glance, it had all been a trap. A meticulously orchestrated trap designed not for fun, not for chance, but for my complete ruin. I felt my knees weaken, my chest tighten, my mind reel. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up and find this was all a horrible dream, but it was. Naomi smiled faintly, as if reading my thoughts, while Suzan's eyes held the cruel satisfaction of success. Joel and Chris emerged from the shadows, grinning, watching my unraveling with a predatory delight. They had manipulated me flawlessly, each step of the plan executed to perfection. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. My life, my mind, my reality, it was all shattered in an instant. The people I had trusted, the people I had considered friends, had engineered every humiliating, devastating moment. The betrayal was total, absolute. And in that moment I understood there would be no recovery, no redemption, no happy ending. The life I had known, the career, the relationships, the confidence, even my own sense of self, had been systematically dismantled. I was left bare, exposed, utterly alone amidst the wreckage. They had won. Joel and Chris had orchestrated the perfect scheme, using Naomi and Suzan as tools, and I had walked willingly into their hands. My mind screamed, my heart shattered, my entire existence unraveled before me. Every instinct, every thought, every hope, destroyed. By the end of that day, the truth was undeniable, unavoidable, and inescapable. I had been played, used, and manipulated at the highest level, and there was nothing left for me but ruin. My life, my sanity, my pride, obliterated. The shock wasn't just in the revelation, it was in the absolute finality. There was no coming back. There was no redemption. There was only the knowledge that I had been outsmarted completely, and the cold, bitter reality that my existence had been dismantled by the very people I had trusted the most. The morning after the revelation felt unreal, like I had woken up inside a nightmare that refused to end. Every corner of my apartment, every object I touched seemed to mock me. Naomi's smile, Suzan's gaze, Joel and Chris's calculated grins. They haunted me, relentless phantoms of the betrayal I had endured. I could barely breathe. My mind raced, looping endlessly over the images of their deceit, the painstaking precision with which they had orchestrated my downfall. Even simple tasks became impossible. Coffee spilled in my hands, keys slipped from my fingers, the world itself seemed conspiring against me. I replayed every interaction, every moment, every subtle touch, now seeing them in their true context. What I had interpreted as chance, as flirtation, as something intoxicating, had all been an elaborate lie. I had been a puppet, blind and willing. Work was unbearable. Each email, each phone call, each casual greeting from colleagues felt like a reminder of my humiliation. Word of the manipulation and betrayal, though not yet public, had begun to ripple subtly through the office. Glances from coworkers, once neutral, now carried an undertone of awareness, suspicion, even pity. The walls I had built around myself, the confidence I had worn like armor, had crumbled completely. I tried to reach out to Joel and Chris, demanding explanations, pleading for some shred of decency, some hint that they might feel guilt. But their answers were cold, calculated, almost gleeful. Every word was a confirmation. I had been completely outsmarted. And there would be no redemption, no apology, no way to reclaim what I had lost. Naomi and Suzan didn't even hide their satisfaction. Every glance, every subtle smirk, was a reminder that I had been manipulated not only by them but through them. They had played their roles perfectly, and I had been utterly blind. The shame was suffocating, a crushing weight that made even breathing feel like a monumental effort. Days blurred into nights. I avoided the office as much as possible, yet even isolation couldn't protect me. My reputation, my relationships, my sense of self, everything was tainted. Friends I thought I could trust began to distance themselves, sensing the chaos that had overtaken my life. I was trapped in the wreckage, unable to reconstruct anything. Every attempt to regain control failed, leaving me more fragmented, more exposed, more aware of the totality of my defeat. Sleep offered no relief. Dreams became hallucinations of their laughter, Naomi's voice whispering temptations, Suzan's eyes staring into my very soul, Joel and Chris orchestrating the chaos with sadistic precision. I would wake in cold sweats, heart hammering, mind racing with memories of every humiliating detail. By the end of the week, I was unrecognizable even to myself. The man I had been confident, assured, composed was gone, replaced by someone fragile, paranoid, broken, consumed by the memory of betrayal. Every instinct, every thought, every desire had been manipulated, and the result was complete, irreversible devastation. The trap was fully sprung. I had walked willingly into it, and now there was no escape. Joel and Chris had won. Naomi and Suzan had executed their roles flawlessly, and I was left standing amidst the ruins of my own life, a victim of a conspiracy so meticulous, so cruel that even my own awareness had come too late. I realized painfully that this wasn't a momentary collapse. It wasn't something that could be repaired, rationalized, or forgiven. It was total, absolute destruction. My life had been dismantled methodically, and I had no one to blame but myself for walking blindly into the trap. By the time the 10th day arrived, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, hollow eyes, slumped shoulders, a man hollowed out by betrayal and manipulation. Naomi's laughter still echoed in my mind, Suzan's piercing gaze haunted my dreams, and Joel and Chris's cruel smiles replayed endlessly, a loop of torment I could not escape. Every attempt to regain normalcy failed. Returning to the office was unbearable. My coworkers, subtle glances and whispered comments made me feel exposed, humiliated beyond repair. Even small interactions triggered panic and shame. I realized that I was no longer just a victim of deceit. I had become a cautionary tale, a living warning of what complete manipulation could do to someone. The women, once objects of desire, had been instruments of my destruction. Naomi's smile, Suzan's touch, every calculated movement, they had all been carefully designed to dismantle me, and it had worked flawlessly. Joel and Chris had orchestrated every detail with surgical precision, leaving me blind to the entire scheme until it was far too late. Sleep offered no escape. Dreams merged with reality, creating a constant nightmare where every touch, every glance, every word was a reminder of the betrayal. I woke in cold sweats, heart pounding, unable to distinguish between past and present, reality and illusion. My mind was fractured, a maze of obsession, regret, and unending shame. My career was in tatters. Every project I had worked on, every effort I had made, was now colored by the knowledge that I had been manipulated, that my judgment had been fatally compromised. Friends who had once respected me now looked at me with pity or suspicion. I had no allies, no support, no path back to the life I had known. Attempts to confront Naomi, Suzan, Joel, or Chris were futile. They all responded with cold amusement or detached indifference. The cruelty was methodical, perfected. There was no reconciliation, no remorse, no second chance. My life had been dismantled completely, and there was no way to rebuild it. Even solitude brought no relief. Every memory, every interaction, every misstep replayed endlessly in my mind, carving deeper grooves of shame and despair. I had been reduced to a shadow of myself, consumed entirely by the consequences of trusting blindly and succumbing to desire. By the end of the 10th day, I understood the truth fully. My life was gone. Every shred of confidence, every relationship, every ambition obliterated. I had walked into a meticulously constructed trap, blinded by my own impulses, and there was nothing left but ruin, absolute ruin. No redemption, no second chances, no hope, only the cold, unyielding reality that I had been completely, irrevocably destroyed. And as I sat alone in the darkness of my apartment, the silence around me was deafening. The world had moved on, indifferent to my suffering, while I remained trapped in the wreckage of a life that no longer existed. The finality of it was staggering. I had been outsmarted, outplayed, and utterly ruined. My mind, my heart, my very existence had been dismantled by the people I had trusted most, and there was no escaping the truth. Absolute total ruin.
If you've ever felt this kind of pain, don't walk through it alone. Hit subscribe and stay with us. More real stories are coming.